when we got good publicity leading up, and I was anticipating a big crowd, and then the cold weather, for some people, won't step out if they can't, they can avoid it. So thanks again. Also, I want to say that we have a good lineup coming up. We don't have January set yet, but we have Mike McCabe coming in February. Really excited about him coming. If you haven't seen him speak, he's a really great speaker. And it was really him, in a sense, that kicked off this whole thing, because when I saw how many people came out to see him speak, I realized there was an audience for it. So it'd be great to have him back. We are working in March towards having something with the, we're hoping, we've tentatively set both candidates running for Attorney General on the Democratic side. This is a progressive meet the candidates, and it's not that we're opposed to having the Republican come. It's that these are progressive candidates. And as the joke I've made before is, if you see a Republican progressive, let me know, because I'm happy to have them come to a forum coming up. And there was a time when there were such creatures, but they seem endangered these days. I remind folks, see a lot of familiar faces here, but in case you haven't come here before, we are the Rock County Progressives, and our mission is to promote activism and education around progressive values. We are nonpartisan. We're totally volunteer, but we do have, like tonight, Democratic politicians. We would have other kinds of politicians as well. The idea is, it's really two things going on here. One is that we get educated, learning about where they come from, and they, in a sense, become educated by learning that there are people out here like you guys who care about the issues that we think are important. So that's a different kind of education, but that's kind of the purpose of these forums. And we hope to have, as the political season heats up, some more meet the candidate type forums coming up in the future, because there are some important races coming up. So stay tuned for that. If you're not on our list, we will pass around the list and sign up for it through the email list. We do call folks. These days, we mostly just call folks without emails. So give us your telephone number as backup. I'll also pass around the hat. The green stuff helps facilitate things like we provide crackers and cheese, we do a big picnic, and incidental expenses come up. It helps grease our wheel, so to speak. So a little green there is definitely appreciated if you have it. These are free events, so don't feel compelled. All right. You all remember the Wisconsin uprising, right? We had thousands, hundreds of thousands of people come out, demonstrate, and you remember all that massive violence that happened? You remember how they tore the place apart? I don't remember any of that. Okay? I mean, it was incredible. I think it really showed the world that hundreds of thousands of people could come out and peacefully demonstrate and voice their opinion to state, how they felt, and in a way that really makes a difference. It's not just saying something, it's putting your body, so to speak, on the line. And what was the lesson, I think, for Walker afterward was it could never happen again. And so, he has really been doing everything possible, in my opinion, to squelch free speech, certainly at the Capitol. He did this emergency order, and I'm sure most of you know about the permits and the battles over the permits. I mean, some have called this a poll tax on free speech, making people pay for it, but it's really more than that, because, as you probably know, the Capitol was designed to encourage free speech. It was understood at the time that that was critical to making democracy work. Instead, what we see is the enforcement of the permitting process really leading to an incredible abuse of police power. And then you add on top of that, in a post-Citizens United world, where money is speech, suddenly, and corporations are people, and such speech rights become even more important. So really the point of this forum was to emphasize two things. One, we have to defend the First Amendment. Okay, so we have to remedy the lack of rights that are critical here, of which the First Amendment is perhaps the most important. Thus, the first. The second is by fixing, if you will, our rights, by fixing the First Amendment, that's the only way we can see to remedy the bigger problems in society, not the least of which is what's going on at the state capitol. So that's kind of the idea of this forum. And when we thought about who could come speak at a forum like that, the name Chris Taylor came to mind. Representative Chris Taylor has long been an advocate for basic human rights, not just in the recent uprising, where, of course, one of the basic rights that a lot of people were defending was the right to collectively bargain for a living wage and decent working conditions. Apparently that's pretty much out, at least for public workers. But she's been in it longer than that. Going back in time, I saw that she graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1990, and I had to mention that because my dad also graduated from there, whatever that's worth. That's why I grew up in Philadelphia, that area, and we're going to have to trade notes on that at least at some point. While there, she volunteered for Planned Parenthood. She worked to advocate an advocacy organization for battered women. She went on to attend the University of Wisconsin Law School, graduating in 1995. And while there, she advocated for incarcerated women. She studied international human rights law in the Netherlands. That sounds interesting. She worked for a human rights organization in Northern Ireland, where another place that's been torn up by all kinds of conflict. She's worked for Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin as the policy and political director. She helped pass the Compassionate Care for Rape Victims Act, the first proactive reproductive health bill to pass in over 3 decades. Pretty incredible. She's been on the State Bar's Public Interest Law Section, Secretary for the Legal Association for Women, and of course, what brought her to our attention most immediately in recent times, she's been a huge supporter of the Solidarity Singers. She's spoken up in the media. Before coming here, I heard her talk on 92.1. Somebody posted it on the internet, so that was kind of cool. She held press conferences, and she got perhaps the most infamous badge of honor of them all. She made it on Walker's watch list. That should be like a badge of honor or something. Well, she's also on our watch list. A legislator who's also a progressive leader. Give another big hand for Chris Taylor.
Thank you so much, Chuck. That was really, what a great introduction. And thank you for everybody being here on a very cold night, but no snow, so that's good. To talk about some really, really important issues that really extend in areas that maybe you had not thought of before. And we're going to talk about First Amendment and the restrictions that we're seeing on First Amendment rights, not just the right to speak, the right to assemble, the preeminence of a religious right that seems to now be the dominant right that we hear about and has been really used to restrict access to health care. And I'll talk a little bit about that. In fact, Hobby Lobby, I saw on my way over here, we'll talk about what they've been up to, which has some real ramifications for people's civil rights. And as Chuck mentioned, my real passion in my life, and really throughout my whole life, has been civil rights and human rights issues. Those are areas that have always motivated me. I have always felt since I was a little girl and saw injustices, mostly based on gender. But as you grow up, you see injustices based on many other factors, that everybody really deserves to be treated fairly and equally, and certainly everybody should have the right to participate in their government. And a large piece of that is the right to speak. I was elected a little more than 2 years ago. I ran in a special election Joe Parisi was elected Dane County Executive in April of 2011. We all remember what was happening in the early months of 2011, that we had an uprising here in I live 2 miles from the Capitol. I spent a lot of time at the Capitol. At the time, I was the public policy director for Planned Parenthood, and really became motivated to run. I'd never run for anything outside of, junior class president in high school, but really became motivated to run because of the crackdown on not just collective bargaining rights, but on all kinds of rights. Really, the right to speak, the right to petition our government, the right of each child to get a quality public education, the right of women, and all those things were under attack in that very first budget that Walker promulgated. So I ran because of all of these issues, and basically I didn't know what else to do with myself. I was so distraught over what was happening in the state. I also had a new baby, 5-month-old baby, and I don't know if I'd recommend that actually, looking back, but felt a real need to do something to defend things that we have held so dear here in Wisconsin. So one of the first issues that I worked on, as Chuck mentioned, I got to the Capitol. I was elected in August of 2011. I got to the Capitol, and one of the first things that I worked on was what was happening with the Solidarity Singers. How many of you, has anyone here participated? Yeah, in the sing-along. Okay. How many of you have seen the sing-along? Maybe haven't participated, but yeah. So when I was first elected, at the time we still had Chief Tubbs, Charles Tubbs, who did, I thought, a very excellent job during the uprising in really balancing the safety concerns that certainly are present when you have tens of thousands of people around the Capitol, with each individual's right to come and protest and express themselves in a peaceful way. And it was amazing, those protests were so peaceful. And I think that's a testament to us in Wisconsin, that we have a long history of peaceful political protests, for the most part. So I think those protests were no different. But when I got to the Capitol, there started to be a bit of a crackdown on the ability to come and sing. And when I first got there, the Chief Tubbs, I think under real pressure from the Walker administration, who clearly did not want to ever have a situation again where you had those kinds of protests. And I think a lot of the things that we have seen from the governor and from this legislature are efforts to make sure that that can never happen again, unfortunately. But when I first got there, they, Chief Tubbs and the administration, through the Department of Administration, promulgated Capitol access policies that now required 4 or more people who were there for political purposes to get a permit. So this was really the first time in history of Wisconsin that this administration started promulgating these kinds of policies, and it looked like they were going to start enforcing them. As Chuck mentioned, in the National Historic Registry, the Capitol Rotunda is recognized as a public forum, as a place where people really are encouraged to come and participate in government, but express themselves politically in a peaceful way. And the whole configuration of the Capitol Rotunda, if you look at the documents, the Capitol Rotunda, as I said, has been recognized as a National Historic Landmark. And in the documents that the state put forth to get that status, made a lot of the fact that the Rotunda was a public forum where people could come and gather and peacefully express themselves. So the Rotunda really has been quite unique in our history. It always has been a gathering spot, and it's the center of government. You know, so we have 4 wings to the Capitol. We have the east, west, north, and south. And if you look above in the Rotunda, there are murals representing the 3 branches of government which converge in the Capitol Rotunda. So symbolically and in actuality, the Rotunda has been a place where people have been encouraged to come. And never had anyone remembered needing a permit to come and peacefully protest. Now that changed a little bit. I don't know if you all remember, it changed a little bit with the uprising, I call it the uprising, in the spring of 2011. The state actually tried to enforce a permit system then, and there was a court case about this, and the state was required to hold open the Capitol Rotunda and make it accessible to people during business hours. So they actually were not successful in requiring a permit to use the rotunda. Well, this was another effort really to require that. And so we went along with this. We were in discussions on needing a permit. There really wasn't too much happening though, too much enforcement of it. And then in the summer of 2012, Chief Tubbs left to take a new position. And the administration brought on Charles Irwin to come. Sorry, not Charles. Actually, I don't even know his first name. Chief Irwin to come and to be the new Capitol Police Chief. And at that point, people began to get arrested for singing under various kind of rationales. First, it was you can't hold a sign in the Capitol Rotunda. You hold a sign, you're going to be arrested under a certain statute. Your sign's going to be confiscated. And I really got very involved at that point because I'm an attorney. I litigated cases for almost 7 years before I went to Planned Parenthood and did a fair amount on some of these constitutional issues. I worked for a guy named Lynn Edelman, who's now a federal judge in Milwaukee, who actually now is hearing a voter ID law. That case is in front of him. And really learned, he was a huge proponent of the First Amendment. So I had, background in this type of law. I was very interested in it. I became very alarmed when people were being arrested for singing without a permit. And they weren't just being, given a citation. They were being handcuffed and taken away under some really inappropriate laws that were being used to justify this. For instance, the law that they were using to confiscate signs pertain to bringing in hazardous equipment or machinery into the Capitol. And that section of the administrative code was being used to confiscate people's signs and to charge them. And I thought this was just totally inappropriate. It was not applicable at all. And these administrative code provisions, there's a whole section in the administrative code about the Capitol and about public buildings. And so these things were being, in my opinion, inappropriately used to cart people away and to confiscate signs. At the same time, we started seeing things in the gallery. So when we were on the floor of the state assembly, you can witness what's happening, which we want people to come and see what we're doing, right, in the state legislature. So there's a gallery. So around the same time, people started being asked to leave if they had a button on that perhaps expressed a political belief that the powers that be did not like, or a t-shirt. People who had things were kind of clipping things to their t-shirts with certain messages. Some people had the Constitution, and they also were being carted away. So this was happening at the same time. The other kind of piece of this that I think we should be cognizant of and we have to watch very closely was what was happening to legislators who were expressing dissent, which I probably am one of the loudest ones, frankly, who expresses a lot of dissent about a lot of these horrible policies that I see. We were being limited in our questions that we asked in committee. The mining bill, the open pit mining bill, we were, the people on that committee, on the National Resources Committee, and I'm not on that committee, but my Democrat colleagues were not allowed to ask questions of the bill's author of that bill. Not allowed to ask questions, not one question. I was on a committee on looking at income tax reform, and also very limited by Robin Voss on what I could ask, because he didn't like the questions I was asking, because they wanted to do a state income flat tax, which is actually what they've done in the state of Wisconsin. So these type of things also started occurring, that we weren't able to do our jobs. We weren't able to speak. And we were elected to do that for our constituents. So all of this was happening at the same time. And then the third kind of prong there that's still in effect is a limitation, and this happened at the beginning of this session, on debate times. So when you're in the minority, like we are in the assembly, what are some tactics you have to exert your power? There's not a lot of them. A lot of them is debating. that you can exhaust the other side. Of course, in the process, you usually exhaust yourself, but you can have a long debate. And what was imposed on this year, or we would have a nuclear option of all kinds of horrible things of cutting off debate, if we didn't agree to a bunch of new rules that the Republicans would employ this nuclear option, where one person could stand up and call for a vote, and a vote would have to happen immediately and cut off debate. So now, in the state assembly, we have limits on every single bill, time limits. They're usually negotiated between, so we do have a say in how much time we need, but in many of these instances, we just had a whole suite of voter ID bills. We're not having enough time to get through our debate because we want to debate. I mean, we're Democrats. We want to debate. We're the minority, and we don't have time to debate. So all of these things were happening at the same time. And in my opinion, they were a huge restriction on our ability to speak and to have dissent in the Capitol. So I am happy to report that Solidarity Sing-Along, there was a case that was brought, the ACLU brought a case challenging the rules and the permitting process. And they were able to get an initial injunction that said it could not be enforced with less than 20 people. And then, miracle about miracle, the administration, the Walker administration, actually was willing to negotiate a settlement where you no longer need a permit to go and protest in the Capitol Rotunda, as long as, if you're more than, I think, 12 is the number they agreed to, as long as you give notice that you're coming. So right now, currently, the Solidarity Sing-Along, what they have to do is just tell them, we're coming, we're showing up, and we're using the space. Which I actually think is a fairly reasonable settlement. The attorneys in the case floated this option to the judge in the case, and he did not jump. He did not buy it, because there's a lot of case law that does say that states can impose limitations on protesting. Now, we have a different tradition, though, in our state that's very different than what happens in a lot of other states. But it actually, in my opinion, the Solidarity Singers are still singing. They don't need to get a permit. They just need to say, we're going to come. And I think the administration was willing to accept that because of all the bad press they start getting of arresting 85-year-old women. There were people, close to having heart attacks when they were arrested. They were using, just really totally unnecessary tactics that were very aggressive, putting people in these plastic handcuffs that would cut into your skin. So doing all these horrible, horrible things that were totally unnecessary, that were against the traditions we have in the state. And these were people who were not threatening anybody. They were just singing. They didn't have, they weren't coming with weapons. You can actually carry a gun in the Capitol, but my God, you carry a sign and you're going to the slammer, that's not allowed. So that issue, I'm happy to report because most of the people being arrested were my constituents. So I spent a lot of time writing letters, speaking out against, and really trying to get the administration to realize what they were doing was not legal. That I do not think they had the basis for doing what they were doing under the grounds that they were doing. That there were over 300 people who were arrested during the crackdown, which really started, fall of 2012, and really was just resolved a couple months ago. So a lot of people arrested, a lot of those cases were dismissed. But I think really important that people are allowed to come to the Capitol without a permit to protest. So I'm happy to report that's one good thing, I think, that has happened in the Capitol on the First Amendment, that actually the Solidarity Singers, I think, had a very good victory. I think that was because the administration began to get very bad press on this issue. And they have an election coming up. So I do think that influenced their willingness. But they also had a judge who clearly was not on their side. I think that was the other thing, is that this judge, and the case was going, it would have been January, this case would have gone to trial next January, and they had a judge that could have thrown out the entire permitting scheme as being unconstitutional, and I don't think they wanted to see that. So it was a lot of different factors, I think, that led to what I would say is a more reasonable, something I I've seen more reasonable from this administration. But really underscoring how important I think it is that people continue to speak out on these issues and continue to advocate on these issues. But this is not an administration that typically likes seeing that. And the other way in the legislature that I think this has impacted us is there's a real retaliatory style of governing from the majority party. If they do not like what you say on the floor, you will be punished. And we see this all the time. You will be punished. We had, as I said a couple weeks ago, a suite of bills all designed to limit voting access. We had a bill that pretty much takes away weekday evening and weekend early voting. Who does that impact? Well, it impacts Mass and Milwaukee and other communities too. And probably here, I bet you have a healthy, I should have looked this up, but I bet you have a healthy population of people who vote early. So we had that bill up. We had a bill that made it harder for seniors in residential facilities. All these horrible bills were coming up. And we had 13 hours for debate. So we were going to get done at 2 in the morning that night. And there was a bill pertaining to Choose Life license plates by Andre Jacques. I know some of you know him. We tried to kind of get off the floor, delay, reach a compromise. And it was clear to me when I saw Wisconsin Right to Life at 8 o'clock in the evening that bill was coming, because they wouldn't have stuck around for that bill. But eventually the Republicans blamed a tweet that I sent on derailing this negotiation. And I was, a tweet? Are you kidding? We were on the floor for 13 hours, probably sent 10 tweets saying what was going on. But rather than, really look at this horrible agenda that they put forth and our fight against that agenda, which was going to keep them there to 2 a.m., they come up with this, that this has to be our fault, that all of these things are coming up. So it's a very, very retaliatory manner of governing from the majority party, in my opinion. And I think it is designed to shut down speech and shut down dissent in that sense. So really quickly, and then I really would like to take questions. I wanted to read the First Amendment to you of the United States Constitution because it pertains to more than freedom of speech. There's a religion clause here too. And I should say, this is from the Heritage Foundation, my handy-dandy little constitution that I got at the ALEC conference, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I can talk for hours on. You'll have to have me back and I'll talk about ALEC. Boy, that was an experience. But I thought, oh, this is great. I'll carry this around in my purse so I can always have the Constitution and whip it out whenever I need it. But this is what the First Amendment says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. I wanted to spend a little bit on the religious freedom clause and talk to you a little bit of what we are seeing in that way. And really what we are seeing is in some contexts, dictating speech. So the majority party passing legislation that actually dictates speech. And where are we seeing this? Well, we're seeing this in the provision of reproductive health care. That physicians are being required to tell patients seeking abortion services certain things.